My name is Enrique. I'm 38 years old and I live in a quiet neighborhood in the city. I work as an accountant and, therefore, I tend to spend a lot of time at home, especially at night, to be able to concentrate. A few weeks ago, something happened that completely baffled me. I had just gotten back from work and, as usual, I was home alone. I put the food in the microwave, sat down at the table, and was about to start dinner when I heard someone knocking on the door. I went there, expecting to be a neighbor or maybe a delivery man. When I opened it, there was no one there. Just a note dropped on the threshold. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but the note said, "I know where you are." At first, I thought it was some kind of joke, especially because there was no one else on the street, and outside, there were no footprints or signs that anyone had stopped there. I thought it was strange, but I left it aside. However, as the night progressed, I began to feel a slight restlessness. It was as if, for some reason, something was wrong. When I returned to the living room, I noticed that the back window, which I always leave closed at night, was slightly open. I went over there, closed it, and tried to get back to my routine. But there was something in the air, something I couldn't identify, as if I were being watched. Over the next few days, the strange behavior continued. I didn't know what was going on, but every time I came home, there was something that didn't seem right. The note was the first sign, but then the other things started. I noticed that the furniture in the room was slightly out of place, as if someone had moved it. When I checked, everything was in the same place, but the feeling that something was different was constant. Then one night, I was working on my computer, and I started hearing soft footsteps behind me. I thought it was the sound of my own footsteps, or perhaps those of my next-door neighbor, but the sound seemed to get closer and closer, until I lay completely still. I looked back, but I didn't see anyone. It was then that I began to hear a voice, a low, almost imperceptible voice, coming from somewhere in the room. It was as if someone was talking to themselves. I got up, went over there, and the house was completely empty. I was starting to lose my cool, until the next morning I realized something even more disturbing. The note was back, this time on my desk, with the same message, "I know where you are." At that moment, I realized that the feeling of being watched was not a matter of paranoia. There was someone, somehow, watching me. That night, I decided to install security cameras around the house. What I saw on the recordings was the most disturbing of all. A person, completely hooded, was standing in my hallway, watching my bedroom door. The strangest thing is that, when I tried to analyze the images more calmly, I realized that the figure looked... Hi, my name is Gabriel. I'm 32 years old, and I live in a small house on the outskirts of the city. I've never been much of a believer in supernatural stories. I always thought people created these things to entertain themselves. But what happened to me last October 17th? That changed everything. The morning started normally, like any other. I woke up early, had my coffee, and went to work. During the ride to work, something seemed strange, but I didn't know exactly what it was. The traffic was calm, and the sky, with heavy clouds, gave the feeling that something was about to happen. The day passed slowly. At work, everything seemed out of place. The air was charged, people were quiet, and a sense of unrest hung in the air. It was as if everyone was waiting for something. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling only grew. When I returned home, around 6 p.m., something caught my attention. The front door was ajar, and I was sure I had closed it before leaving. My heart sank, but I went in anyway. There was no one at home, but the feeling that someone was watching followed me through the rooms. The light in the room flickered, and a low sound, as if something was scratching the wall, began to come from the hallway. I went there, but when I turned on the light, everything was normal, or at least it seemed to be. I decided to ignore the signs and went to my room. However, with every step he took around the house, the scratching sound grew louder. It was no longer a simple noise, but a continuous sound, as if something was coming towards me. When I closed my bedroom door, the sound stopped abruptly. I spent the night agitated, trying to understand what was happening, but there was no logic. The next morning, as I left the house, I noticed something that still gives me goosebumps. On the glass of the front door was a handprint. It wasn't a normal hand, but a deformed impression, as if something had placed a bloody hand there. The feeling of dread was instantaneous. I went back inside and started checking each room, but found nothing. I was starting to think I might have imagined it all, until something even stranger happened. When I went to the bathroom, I looked in the mirror and saw, for a second, a figure behind me. It wasn't a common reflex. The figure was dark, distorted, with eyes that seemed to penetrate my soul. I screamed, and the figure disappeared instantly. My breathing was labored, and I knew, at that moment, that something supernatural was present in my house. Since that day, I haven't slept peacefully. The feeling of being watched never left me. Each night the scratching starts again. My name is Clara. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a nurse in an emergency hospital in the city. It happened to me on a recent shift, and to this day I can't get the strange feeling out of my body. It was a cold and rainy night, like many that I have experienced during these night shifts. The hospital was emptier than usual, and the only thing I could hear were footsteps echoing through the hallways. It was late, around 3 a.m., when I found myself alone in the ward. The other nurses had gone for break, and the doctors were busy with a seriously ill patient. The shift was peaceful until, as I passed one of the rooms, I noticed that the door was slightly open. The patient there had already been transferred, so, on an impulse, I went in to check that everything was in order. When I entered, the light flickered and went out, leaving the room in complete darkness. I turned on the flashlight on my cell phone, and when I illuminated the patient's bed, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. The cover was perfectly arranged, but there was something underneath, a silhouette, as if someone was lying there. It was impossible. The patient had already left. I tried to speak, to ask if anyone was there, but no answer. I went to the bed, and when I pulled back the cover, the room seemed to be even quieter, as if everything around me had stopped. There was no one. What really disturbed me was the fact that, when I looked at the wall next to the bed, I found a crumpled note. The note was handwritten. "You won't get out of here alive." The note made me shudder, and fear paralyzed me for a few seconds. I picked it up, trying to understand what was happening, but when I looked back into the room, I felt something had changed. The air was heavier, and suddenly the sound of other people's footsteps echoing through the hallways disappeared. I was alone. I went to the door and closed it carefully, but when I tried to leave, the hallway was empty, strangely empty, as if the hospital had suddenly been deserted. The feeling of being watched invaded me. I went back to reception, where the night nurse was supposed to be, but she too was gone. I walked through the corridors, calling for someone, until, as I passed a nursing wing, I heard a low, almost inaudible whisper coming from one of the rooms. I ran there, not knowing what to expect. When I opened the door, I saw a shadow slowly moving under the bed, as if someone was crawling. Fear took hold of me, and as I tried to scream, a cold hand grabbed me by the ankle, pulling me into the room. I tried to fight, but the force was overwhelming, and I was soon dragged into a hole of total darkness. I don't know what happened in that hospital that night, but I know that when I woke up, I was back at my post, with the day already brightening. The doctors said I had fainted because of exhaustion, but the feeling that something was wrong never left me. To this day, I have never returned to that sector, and I always avoid going near that room. But I know I saw something, heard something, and it wasn't an illusion. My name is Marcos. I'm 27 years old, and I live in an apartment in the city center. I've always been a calm person, with no major worries. But what happened that night changed my perception about everything. It was a Tuesday, and the day had been quite busy. When I got home around 8 p.m., I was tired and eager to rest. My routine usually consisted of watching a video or series before bed. I didn't notice anything strange until, as I passed the kitchen, I noticed that the living room light was on, although I was sure I had turned it off before leaving. I thought it was strange, but I quickly made a joke to myself, thinking I might have forgotten. After a while, I began to feel a slight uneasiness. I couldn't explain it, but something felt different. The house was too quiet, as if the pressure in the air had increased. I ignored this feeling, but as I went to the bathroom, something made me look back. The hallway was empty, but I could swear something or someone was moving in the shadows. I tried to ignore it, but a growing sense of discomfort began to consume me. When I lay down to sleep, the tension only increased. I couldn't relax, and with each loud noise from the house, my heart seemed to speed up a little more. Then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound coming from the living room. It was a light scratching, as if someone was rubbing something against the wall. I got out of bed, my body heavy with sleep, and went to the living room. The light was off, and the house seemed quiet, but the noise continued. I walked around the room and found nothing, but as I passed the bookshelf, I felt a slight breeze behind me. This made no sense as the windows were closed. I went back to my room, locking the door behind me, and tried to sleep again. But at that moment, something in the air told me that I was no longer alone. In the morning, when I woke up, the feeling of discomfort had not gone away, and, to my surprise, on the wall of the room, there were finger marks, as if someone had touched the wall while crawling. These were not normal marks, but deep impressions, almost as if the skin had been pressed hard. I lived alone, so I couldn't understand how that could have happened. Since that day, the atmosphere in my home has never been the same. The feeling of being watched, and the inexplicable sounds, became a constant. I don't know what happened that night, but I know that my home never felt safe again. My name is Amanda. I'm 29 years old, and I live in a simple apartment in the city center. I'm not one to believe in paranormal stories, but what happened to me a few weeks ago still makes me question what I experienced. It was a Friday night, and I was alone at home, resting after a busy week at work. The apartment was silent except for the sound of rain hitting the window. I decided to watch a movie, and after a while, I felt sleepy. I turned off the lights and lay down on the bed. I woke up a few hours later, around 3 a.m., with a strange feeling. The room felt colder than usual, and there was a slight pressure in the air, as if something was out of place. I lay there, trying to ignore the feeling. I looked at the clock and realized it was still too early to get up. But when I looked at my bedroom door, something bothered me. It was ajar. I was sure I had closed it before going to sleep. I got up, but didn't go to the door right away. I just stood there, trying to understand what could have caused this. When I finally got up and went there was nothing unusual. The door was, in fact, slightly open, but that didn't explain the strange sensation I felt. I decided to go back to bed and try to sleep again, but the feeling that something wasn't right didn't leave me. The next morning, I decided not to give any more importance to what had happened. It turns out that as the day went on, something was still bothering me. I couldn't get out of my head the fact that my bedroom door was open, even though I knew I had closed it. It was like my mind was trying to convince me that I had done something wrong. In the evening, I came home after a busy day, and before going to sleep, I started to organize some things. When I entered the bathroom to take a shower, something caught my attention. On the mirror, next to the sink, there was a stain. It wasn't something big, but it was visible. It looked like a fingerprint. I thought it could be something from humidity or dirt, but I couldn't understand how it could have gotten there. That night, the mood seemed heavier. The silence in the house was absolute. When I went to bed, I noticed that the bedroom door was ajar again. The feeling was that something was there, watching me, but I didn't see anything. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the fear, and closed the door firmly. However, what really made me uneasy was that, the next day, as I passed through the hallway, I saw a light that seemed to have been turned on in my room while I was in the kitchen. This made me nervous, but when I entered the room, everything was as I left it. There were no more strange events after that, but the feeling that someone had been there, where they shouldn't have been, never left me. I still don't know what happened, but I know that, since that night, the silence in my house has never felt the same.